Hi, I'm Carl Weber. Welcome to Video Aided Instructions English Grammar Series. The topic of this program is using modifiers correctly. I like to compare a sentence to a machine. Now, every machine has a purpose: to dig holes, to produce goods, to transport passengers. The purpose of a sentence is to convey meaning from one person to another. Now, like most machines, a sentence is made up of various parts. They're called the parts of speech. Nouns, pronouns, and verbs are three of the most important parts of speech. Think of them as crucial parts of the machine, like the engine and transmission in your car. In this program, we're going to look at a different part of the sentence. Our topic is modifiers. These are words or groups of words that add information about the nouns, pronouns, and verbs of the sentence. Modifiers give a special spin to the sentence. They add color, vividness, and interest. Think of modifiers as being like the chrome trim, the tinted windshield, and the CD player in your car. They aren't as important as the engine or the transmission, but they make the car a lot more fun to drive. In this program, we'll look at some of the basic principles for using modifiers correctly in the sentences you write. Are you ready? Then let's get started. A modifier gives more information about something else in the sentence. We call it a modifier because it modifies, that is, changes what we know about something else in the sentence. It gives more information or tells us something more about another item in the sentence. Now, the two most important kinds of modifiers are adjectives and adverbs. And in this lesson, we'll look at some of the basic principles for using adjectives and adverbs correctly. First, an adjective modifies a noun or pronoun. As you know, a noun names a person, place, thing, or idea, and a pronoun can take the place of a noun. An adjective would be a word that modifies or gives more information about a noun or pronoun appearing in the sentence. Take a look at this phrase, a diligent worker. In this phrase, worker is a noun. It names a person. Diligent is an adjective. It gives more information about the noun worker. It tells us what kind of worker, a diligent worker. That is, a worker who works hard. So the word diligent is an adjective because it modifies or gives more information about the noun worker. By contrast, an adverb modifies a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. As you can see, an adverb is also a modifier, just as an adjective is, but an adverb can be used in one of three different ways. It can modify a verb, or an adjective, or another adverb. Let's take a look at some examples. Here's a short sentence. She works diligently. When you analyze a sentence, it's usually best to begin by looking for the verb, the single most important word in the sentence. What's the verb here? The verb is works. What's the subject of the verb works? Who or what is doing the working? The answer is the pronoun she. Now, what about the word diligently? What role does that play in the sentence? Well, diligently is an adverb because it gives more information about or modifies the verb works. It tells us how she works diligently. Since diligently modifies or gives more information about a verb, it's an adverb. Here's another sentence. She is very diligent. Here we have a sentence with a slightly different structure. The verb in this sentence is. The subject is the pronoun she. Now, the difference between the verb is and the verb works is the following. Works is an action verb. An action verb describes something that the subject does. Is a linking verb. A linking verb describes something that the subject is. So in this case, we have a sentence containing a linking verb rather than an action verb. Notice that what follows the linking verb is the adjective diligent. That adjective diligent refers back to, describes, or modifies the subject of the sentence, the pronoun she. It tells us something more about she. She is diligent. And that leaves the word very. What role does very play in this particular sentence? Well, very is an adverb which modifies or gives more information about the adjective diligent. How diligent is she? Very diligent. So very gives us more information about the adjective diligent. Therefore, very is an adverb, because remember, another one of the roles that an adverb can play is to modify or give more information about an adjective. And that's what very is doing in this sentence. Finally, look at this sentence. She works extremely diligently. What's the verb? Works. The subject? The pronoun she. And again, we have an action verb. This sentence describes something that she does rather than something that she is. Now we have the adverb diligently, which modifies the verb works. It tells us how she works. How? Diligently. And we have one more word, extremely. What role does extremely play in the sentence? Well, extremely is an adverb. And what does it modify? In this case, it modifies another adverb. It modifies diligently. How diligently does she work? Extremely diligently. So extremely gives us more information about or modifies the adverb diligently. So in this case, we have an adverb being used to modify another adverb. So we've seen examples now of all three ways that an adverb can be used: to modify a verb, to modify an adjective, or to modify another adverb. Notice that the adverbs extremely and diligently both happen to end in the letters ly. That's rather common in English. Not all adverbs end in ly, but many do. So when you're looking at a word in English that ends in ly, if you aren't certain what part of speech it is, consider whether or not it's an adverb. Chances are good that it is. Now, in some sentences in English, it can be a little tricky to figure out whether to use an adjective or an adverb. Here are a couple of rules that will make it easier. First, after an action verb, use an adverb. Remember that an action verb describes something that the subject does. Normally, after an action verb, an adverb should be used. We've already seen an example of this. She works diligently. Here we have the action verb works describing something that the subject, she, does. And diligently is an adverb which modifies the action verb works. It tells us how she works, gives more information about the verb, and therefore the adverb diligently is perfectly correct. After a linking verb, use an adjective. Remember that a linking verb expresses a state of being. It tells us something that the subject is, rather than something that the subject does. Take a look at this sentence. She is diligent. Here we have a sentence containing the linking verb is. The subject is she, and what follows the linking verb correctly is an adjective, not an adverb. She is diligent. That adjective diligent refers back to or modifies the pronoun she. It tells us what she is, and therefore an adjective is correctly used in this sentence. Remember that an adjective is used to modify or give more information about a noun or pronoun. Since diligent refers back to the pronoun she, an adjective rather than an adverb is correct. So in a sentence that contains a linking verb, you generally want to follow it with an adjective, not an adverb. Now, the most common linking verb in English is the verb to be, and is a form of the verb to be. But there are many other linking verbs in English. Looks, seems, appears, feels, sounds. All of these can be linking verbs. To determine whether or not a verb is being used as a linking verb or an action verb, stop and ask yourself, is this sentence describing something that the subject is doing, or is it rather saying something about what the subject is? If the latter is the case, then the verb is being used as a linking verb and should be followed by an adjective. So, for example, if the sentence, she is diligent, instead used one of these other linking verbs, the adjective diligent would continue to be correct. She looks diligent. That's really saying something about what she is, rather than what she does. So looks is a linking verb, and diligent, the adjective, is correct. She seems diligent. She appears diligent. She feels diligent. All of these are linking verbs. They're all describing something that she is rather than something that she does. And therefore, the adjective diligent is correctly used. Now, there are a couple of specific modifying words in English that can be tricky because of adjective and adverb confusion. And we'll take the next few moments of this lesson to explain the rules for using these words correctly. One somewhat tricky word in English is the word well. It can be used in a number of different ways. Well can be a noun, for example. It's a hole in the ground from which you get water. A wishing well, for example. Well can also be used as an interjection. That's a word that's very loosely connected to the rest of the sentence. Sometimes you'll hear people begin a sentence with the word well. They'll say something like, well, I think it'll rain later on today. In that sentence, the word well is simply being used almost as a space filler and doesn't have any particular meaning or any grammatical connection to the rest of the sentence. So well can be a noun, and it can be an interjection. In this lesson, we're not going to deal with either of those two uses of the word well. Instead, we're going to talk about how well is used as an adjective or an adverb. What makes it tricky is that when well is used as an adjective, it has a different meaning from when it's used as an adverb. Here's the explanation. When well is used as an adjective, it means healthy. When it's used as an adverb, it means in a good way. It's important to keep these two meanings separate and distinct in your mind. Here are some examples of the correct way to use the word well. The patient looks well today. What's the verb in this sentence? Looks. The subject, patient. Now, is looks in this sentence an action verb or a linking verb? Is it describing something that the patient is doing or something that the patient is? Well, if you think about it, this sentence is really describing something that the patient is. It's not telling something the patient did, but rather that the patient is or seems to be healthy. So the patient's state of being is being described, not an action that the patient is undertaking. So looks in this sentence is being used as a linking verb. What follows a linking verb should always be an adjective. And remember that the word well, when it's used as an adjective, means healthy. Is that being correctly used in this sentence? Of course. Since we're talking about a patient, it would be natural to talk about the state of health of the patient. So this sentence is perfectly correct. The patient looks well today means that the patient appears to be healthy. And that's an example of the correct use of the word well as an adjective to mean healthy. Look at this sentence. The hospital feeds its patients well. What's the verb here? Feeds. The subject, hospital. The hospital feeds. Now, is feeds a verb of action or a linking verb? Is something that the hospital does or something that the hospital is being described? Well, here what's being described is something that the hospital does. It feeds its patients well. In other words, it gives them meals that are good, nutritious, and so forth. So feeds is an action verb. And what follows an action verb should be an adjective or an adverb. Well, it should be an adverb. And in this case, the adverb well is being used correctly. Remember, the adverb well has nothing to do with health. It means in a good way. So what this sentence is saying is the hospital feeds its patients in a good way. And that's a perfectly correct and logical meaning. So the adverb well means in a good way, and it's being used correctly in this sentence. The hospital feeds its patients in a good way, meaning it gives them food that's tasty, healthful, and so forth. So well is being used to mean in a good way, and it's being used as an adverb. Don't confuse the adjective well with the adjective good. Look at this sentence. You look good in your new dress. What's the verb here? Look. The subject, the pronoun you. Now, is look a verb of action or a linking verb? In this case, look is being used as a linking verb. What's being described is not something that you are doing, but rather how you look, how you appear, how you are in the broadest sense. You are good looking. You're looking good today. So what's being described here is not some action that you're taking, but rather a state of being that you have. So look is being used as a linking verb here. And in this sentence, it's followed by the adjective good, which is perfectly correct. When I say you look good, what I'm saying is you are good. You are good looking in that dress. So the adjective good is correct. It would be incorrect to use the adjective well instead. If this sentence read, you look well in your new dress, it would seem to have a strange meaning, because remember, the adjective well means healthy. And it would sound as though I was saying you look healthy in your new dress, as though something about the dress makes you look less sick. And that's usually not the effect that dresses have. So when following a linking verb, if you want to talk about someone or something being good as opposed to healthy, the adjective good should be used, not the adjective well. It's a little tricky because the adverb well means in a good way, but remember, the adjective and the adverb well have very different meanings. Another word that's tricky in English is badly. Badly is an adverb meaning in a bad way. Use it only with an action verb. Here's an example. The accident damaged the car badly. What's the verb in this sentence? Damaged. The subject? Accident. The accident damaged. Is this an action verb or a linking verb? Well, what's being described is an action, something that the accident did rather than something the accident was. So damaged is an action verb, and what follows it should be an adverb. So the adverb badly is being used correctly in this sentence. How was the car damaged, or how did the accident damage the car? Badly, in a bad way. In other words, the damage was very serious. The car was nearly destroyed. So badly is being used correctly here as an adverb to modify the action verb damaged. Now, the mistake that people sometimes make is to use the adverb badly when the adjective bad would be correct. Look at this sentence. I feel badly about the accident. What's the verb here? Feel. The subject, the pronoun I. I feel badly. Now, is feel an action verb or a linking verb? This one may be a little tricky, but if you think about it, feel is not describing an action. It's not describing something that I'm doing. Rather, it's describing a state of being of me. I feel sad, depressed, unhappy. So the word that follows feel should really be an adjective describing how I am, because it's describing my state of being, not something I'm doing. So the correct wording of this sentence should be, I feel bad about the accident. Bad in this case is being used as sort of a synonym for unhappy, sad, or depressed. So when you're using a linking verb, it should be followed by the adjective bad, not by the adverb badly. It's a mistake that people often make in English, but it's something that you can avoid if you simply remember that a linking verb should be followed by an adjective, not by an adverb. If you can remember and practice these rules for the correct use of well, bad, and badly, you'll avoid some of the most common mistakes that people make when they're using modifiers in English. Well, do you think you've mastered these simple rules? I hope so. Turn to your study guide and you'll find that we've provided an exercise to give you a chance to practice using these rules yourself. Try your hand at the questions in the exercise, and when you're finished, come back to this program and we'll look at the questions together. In each of these sentences, a modifying word has been underlined. Your job is to decide whether the modifier is correct, and if it's incorrect, to decide what modifier ought to be used instead. Let's take a look at the first sentence. Glancing at himself in the mirror just moments before the job interview, Enrico felt well about his appearance. And the word well is underlined. You recall that the word well is one of those tricky words. It can be used as either an adjective or an adverb, and its meaning differs depending on which it's being used as. Now, in this particular sentence, how is the word well being used, as an adjective or an adverb? That depends on the verb that it's near. So let's take a close look at that verb. Enrico felt well about his appearance. What's the verb here? The verb is felt. The subject is Enrico. Enrico felt. Now, is felt being used as an action verb or a linking verb? Is it describing something that Enrico is doing, or is it describing something that Enrico is, a state of being of Enrico? There's really no action being described here. Instead, we're being told something about what Enrico is. That is, how he feels, his state of mind, his state of being. So, felt is a linking verb in this sentence. And with a linking verb, you would always use an adjective, not an adverb. Therefore, well should be used here as an adjective. And if that's the case, is it the correct word or not? Is it the correct adjective? Remember what well means when it's used as an adjective. It means healthy. So the sentence now appears to be saying Enrico felt healthy about his appearance. Does that make sense? Not really. We know what the author is really trying to say. Enrico felt good about his appearance. If you want to use an adjective with the linking verb and your intention is to convey the meaning good, then you have to use the adjective good rather than the adjective well. Well can only be used as an adjective to mean healthy. So in this case, the modifier well should be changed to good, and that would make the sentence correct. As originally written, it's incorrect. Take a look at the next example. The chef's hands moved quick as she demonstrated the proper technique for dicing onions. Here the modifier quick is underlined. Now, is quick an adjective or an adverb? If you think about it, you can realize that quick is an adjective. The adverb with a corresponding meaning would have ly on the end. Remember, we've already seen that many adverbs in English have ly at the end. So quick would be an adjective, quickly would be an adverb. Now, is it correct to use an adjective or an adverb in this particular part of the sentence? What is it modifying? Well, it's modifying the verb moved. It's telling how the chef's hands moved. And is moved an action verb or a linking verb? Is it describing an action or a state of being? Well, clearly the verb moved is describing an action. You can see her hands moving just by imagining what's going on when you read this sentence. So moved is an action verb, and therefore it should be followed by an adverb, not an adjective. So the modifier quick is incorrect. Instead of the adjective quick, we want the adverb quickly, and that would make this incorrect sentence correct. So quick, the adjective, should be changed to the adverb quickly. Next question. Although Jason seems happy about moving to California, he admits that he will miss his friends in Minnesota. Here the modifier happy is underlined. Now, is happy an adjective or an adverb? Happy is an adjective. It's the kind of word that you would normally use to modify or add information about a noun or a pronoun. A happy camper, for example. Happy is an adjective modifying the noun camper. Now, is an adjective or adverb correct in this particular sentence? What is being modified by the adjective happy? Well, let's look at the verb that's nearby. It says, although Jason seems happy about moving to California, the verb is seems. Now, is seems an action verb or a linking verb? Is it describing something that the subject Jason is doing, or rather something that the subject Jason is? Well, it's a linking verb. It's describing something that Jason is rather than something that Jason does. Jason seems happy means almost the same as Jason is happy. Seems is a linking verb, and remember, a linking verb would normally be followed by an adjective, not an adverb. So the adjective happy is correct in this sentence, and therefore the sentence is perfectly correct as written. The sentence contains a linking verb which should be followed by an adjective, and it is. So this sentence is correct. Next example. Because of her extreme nervousness, Soon Lee performed the sonata bad during her audition for the college orchestra. And the modifier bad is underlined. Once again, we have the adjective-adverb question to deal with. First of all, is the underlined modifier bad an adjective or an adverb? Well, as we saw in the lesson, badly would be the adverb form. Remember that in many cases in English, an adverb ends in ly, and you can often turn an adjective into an adverb simply by adding ly at the end. So in this case, the adverb is not being used. Instead, we have the adjective bad being used. Now, is the adjective correct in this particular part of the sentence, or should an adverb be used instead? Let's look at the context, and in particular, let's focus on the verb. It says, Soon Lee performed the sonata bad. What's the verb there? The verb is performed. The subject is Soon Lee. Now, is performed an action verb or a linking verb? Is it describing something that Soon Lee did or something that she was? It's describing something that Soon Lee did. Performing the sonata is an action. So performed is an action verb. And remember that an action verb needs to be followed by an adverb, not an adjective. So this sentence is wrong as written. The adjective bad is incorrect. Instead, the adverb badly should be used, and badly would modify the action verb performed. So to correct the sentence, you would want to make it read, because of her extreme nervousness, Soon Lee performed the sonata badly during her audition for the college orchestra. Next example. The team doctor decided that Mona was well enough to play in Saturday's championship game, and the modifier well is underlined. Remember that well can be used as either an adjective or an adverb, and that its meaning will vary depending on which way it's used. In this sentence, which way is the word well being used? Let's look at the context. We're told that Mona was well enough to play in Saturday's championship game. What's the nearby verb? The verb is was. And is was an action verb or a linking verb? Well, was is a linking verb. In fact, it's a form of the most common linking verb in English, the verb to be. What's being described here is not an action that Mona is taking, but rather a state of being, something that Mona was rather than something that Mona did. So was is a linking verb, and what follows a linking verb should be an adjective, not an adverb. All right then, if well is being used as an adjective, is it the correct word in this context? Remember that as an adjective, the word well means healthy. So the sentence is saying Mona was healthy enough to play in Saturday's championship game. Does that make sense? Of course, because we're being told that the team doctor made this decision. The doctor, of course, would be concerned with Mona's health, and therefore well makes sense. It's the correct word grammatically, because the adjective fits logically into the sentence, and it's the correct word in terms of its meaning, because health is what is being discussed here. So for this last example, the sentence is perfectly correct as written. So far, we've been talking about the use of single words as modifiers, namely adjectives and adverbs. Sometimes groups of words can be used as modifiers, specifically phrases and clauses. Now, if you've watched the program in this series that deals with sentence structure, then you're familiar with phrases and clauses. Both phrases and clauses are groups of words. The main difference between them is that a clause contains a subject and a verb. And a clause can be either an independent clause or a subordinate clause. A subordinate clause can't stand alone as a sentence. Now, as we'll see in a moment, both phrases and subordinate clauses are often used as modifiers in sentences. In other words, they give more information about something else that appears in the sentence. In that sense, these phrases and clauses are being used very much like adjectives and adverbs. And there are a couple of special problems that can sometimes arise when phrases and clauses are used as modifiers. First, let's look at a couple of examples of how a phrase and a clause can be used as a modifier. Take a look at this sentence. Running to catch the bus, I tripped on my untied shoelace. Now, what's the main verb in this sentence? It's tripped. The subject is I, the pronoun. I tripped on my untied shoelace. That's the main action of the sentence. The sentence begins, however, with 5 words that are set off by a comma, and they form a separate phrase, running to catch the bus. Now, what's the function of this phrase in the sentence? What role does it play? Well, if you think about it, what this phrase does is it modifies or gives more information about something else in the sentence. Namely, it gives more information about I. What was I doing? Running to catch the bus. That entire phrase there tells something more about the pronoun I. It describes what I was doing at the time of the accident, of the tripping. So running to catch the bus is acting, the entire group of words is acting in a sense as an adjective. It's a modifying phrase, and the whole group of words refers to, modifies, or gives more information about I in the sentence. So this is an example of how a phrase in a sentence can act as a modifier. Very often, when a sentence begins with a group of words like this, set off by a comma, it's acting as a modifier. And as we'll see in a moment, it should be near to or next to whatever it's modifying. Take a look at this sentence for a somewhat different example. The food was spoiled because it had been left on the table overnight. Now, this sentence contains two different verbs. First, we have the food was spoiled. This is a clause unto itself because it contains a subject and a verb. The verb is was spoiled, a two-word verb phrase. The subject, food or the food. So the food was spoiled is a clause. It could even stand alone as a sentence. But then we have another clause. Because it had been left on the table overnight is also a clause. It also contains a subject and a verb. The verb is the phrase had been left, and the subject is the pronoun it. Because it had been left on the table overnight is a clause, but it can't stand alone as a sentence. That word at the beginning, because, turns it into a subordinate clause. Because is a subordinating conjunction, and when it begins a clause, the clause can't stand alone as a sentence. If you saw this standing as a sentence, you would say, that sounds incomplete. I don't understand what's being said. Because turns it into a subordinate clause. So we have a main clause, an independent clause, followed by a subordinate clause. A very common structure for a sentence. Now again, when you think about it, the subordinate clause, and this is usually the case, is acting as a modifier. It's giving more information about something that appears in the independent clause. Because it had been left on the table overnight, that all explains why the food was spoiled. Therefore, this subordinate clause is acting as a kind of adverb. It's giving more information about or modifying the verb was spoiled. So here we have an entire clause acting as an adverb, acting as a modifier. So in the two sentences we've just looked at, we've seen how groups of words can act as modifiers. In the first sentence, we saw a group of words acting as an adjective, modifying the pronoun I. In this sentence, we have a group of words, a clause, acting as an adverb, modifying the verb was spoiled. So now we can see how groups of words, phrases, and clauses can act as modifiers. Now, why does this pose problems for writing English sentences? It can create a problem if the modifying phrase or clause is not placed in the proper relationship to the rest of the sentence. And there are two basic problems to watch out for. Here they are. First, when a modifier is separated from the word or words it modifies, causing confusion, it is called a misplaced modifier. A modifying phrase or clause should always be placed as close as possible to the word or words it modifies. That way, it's obvious to the person reading the sentence exactly what idea is linked to what. When the link is not clear, when the two things are not placed close to one another, then confusion, even momentary confusion, arises, and the sentence is considered wrong. And then we have the problem of the misplaced modifier. Take a look at this sentence. Painted bright yellow, the decorator selected a new cabinet for the kitchen. Now this sentence begins with a modifying phrase, painted bright yellow. Very often, as we've seen, a modifying phrase appears at the beginning of the sentence, and it's usually set off by a comma from the rest of the sentence. Now, what immediately follows the modifying phrase should be the word or words that the modifying phrase refers to or modifies. In this case, we have painted bright yellow followed by the decorator. If you stop and think about it for a moment, it almost sounds as though the sentence is saying that the decorator was painted bright yellow. Of course, that's not the idea. A person would never be painted bright yellow. And so after a few seconds of confusion, the reader immediately figures out what is really going on. The thing that's really painted bright yellow, of course, is the new cabinet that has been selected for the kitchen by the decorator. But there is a moment or two of confusion, and it's actually a little comic if you think about what the sentence seems to be saying. Painted bright yellow, the decorator selected a new cabinet for the kitchen. It doesn't really make sense, and it's a little bit confusing, causes the reader to pause just a second to get his or her bearings and figure out what's actually being said. And that's not the kind of effect you want your writing to have. Ideally, a sentence should be perfectly clear the first time through and not cause the reader to pause. This particular sentence violates the rule by separating the modifying phrase from the word that it modifies, and therefore we have a misplaced modifier. Now, how do you correct a misplaced modifier? The easiest and usually the best way to correct it is simply to move the modifying phrase or clause so that it is next to what it modifies. So to correct this sentence, we would want to move the words painted bright yellow and put them next to the cabinet. The sentence could then read, the decorator selected a new cabinet painted bright yellow for the kitchen. And that would be a simple, easy, and perfectly correct way of rewriting this sentence. So the normal solution for a misplaced modifier is simply to move the modifier so that it is next to what it's supposed to be modifying. A different kind of problem is caused and solved in a different way. When a modifier has no word or words in the sentence to modify, it is called a dangling modifier. In this kind of sentence, the connection has broken down altogether because we have a modifying phrase or clause that actually doesn't have any word or words in the sentence to link up to or to modify. And therefore, the confusion on the part of the reader is even greater. And a little more work has to be done in order to correct this kind of sentence, a sentence containing a dangling modifier. Here's an example. While driving to work yesterday morning, an accident delayed traffic on the highway. Okay, let's take a look at this sentence. After the comma, we have the main part of the sentence. An accident delayed traffic on the highway. We have the verb delayed, the subject accident, and that could stand alone as a sentence. What comes before the comma is a modifying phrase, which is designed to give more information, to add some detail about what's being described in the main part of the sentence, while driving to work yesterday morning. The problem is that that modifying phrase doesn't link up to any word or words in the rest of the sentence. Think about it for a moment. Who is being described in that modifying phrase? While driving to work yesterday morning, who? Who was driving to work yesterday morning? The rest of the sentence says, an accident delayed traffic on the highway. That leaves it totally unclear who was driving to work, who is being discussed here. And therefore, there's no real connection between the modifying phrase and whoever is supposed to be modified by it. In fact, the person being modified doesn't appear in the sentence. And that's why we call this a dangling modifier. It is a would-be modifier that doesn't have any word or words to modify. Solving the problem of a dangling modifier is a little more tricky than solving the misplaced modifier. A misplaced modifier can be fixed simply by moving it. A dangling modifier generally requires that you rewrite the sentence, and usually there's more than one good way of doing it. Here are two possible ways of fixing this particular sentence. One way would be to take the modifying phrase and turn it into a subordinate clause, adding a subject and a verb, and thereby making it much clearer what's being described. If you were to do that to this sentence, it might read as follows. While I was driving to work yesterday morning, an accident delayed traffic on the highway. Notice that we've now taken the modifying phrase, while driving to work yesterday morning, and turned it into a clause with the complete subject and verb, I was driving. While I was driving to work yesterday morning. Notice that it's no longer unclear who is being referred to in that phrase, driving to work yesterday morning. Now, it's obvious that I'm the one who is doing the driving. And therefore, turning this into a subordinate clause makes it perfectly clear and solves the problem of the dangling modifier. Another way of solving the problem would be as follows. Remember that the modifying phrase or clause should always be next to what it modifies. Therefore, what you could do with this sentence would be to keep the modifying phrase at the beginning of the sentence and just make sure that what immediately follows it explains who or what was doing the driving. In other words, make sure that right after the comma we put the word or words that are being modified by the modifying phrase. That would mean that right after the comma you'd want to have I, if I am the one doing the driving. And again, that requires a little bit of rewriting. The sentence might read, for example, as follows. While driving to work yesterday morning, I was delayed by an accident on the highway. Notice how we've solved the problem. We've kept the modifying phrase in place, but made sure that what follows immediately after it is I. And that makes it clear that I am the one being modified. I was the one who was driving to work yesterday morning. And then, of course, we've had to rewrite the clause a little bit to make it clear exactly what was going on. I was delayed is the way of rewriting that clause so that it contains the same meaning but begins with I. So the problem of the dangling modifier exists when you have a modifying phrase or clause that isn't connected logically to the rest of the sentence. And usually there's more than one way of fixing it. And in this case, you have at least two alternatives, and there probably are other acceptable ways of fixing it. The important thing is to make sure that when you have the rewritten sentence, that you read it through and make certain that any modifying phrases or clauses are right next to the word or words that they're intended to modify. That way the sentence will be logical, clear, and easy to read. Okay, we've provided an exercise in your study guide that will give you a chance to test your ability to recognize and fix sentences that contain misplaced and dangling modifiers. Try your hand at the exercise, and when you're done, come back to the program.